Hello and welcome to the Rugby Chat podcast. This is episode 8 and we are going to be talking about the Rugby Championship, the Mighty 10 Cup and Women's Rugby, amongst other things. Don't forget to subscribe on your favourite podcast app so that we drop into your phone every week. And please also leave us a 5-star review. Other stars are available on iTunes. And I was supposed to go to review and I've forgotten to bring the email up to read out a review because we have had some reviews. Sorry, I will have that ready for you next week. If you'd like to watch what is behind the covers, the show is live on YouTube at 8 p.m. from New Zealand time every Tuesday. You can also join in the discussion on our 5 questions via Twitter. Just follow at DrivingMaul on Twitter and look out for the questions using #RugbyChat. I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, and I will be your host for the next hour or so. Joining me this week is Ryan again from the Tribe Sports app. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh dear, really, my tongue's not working this evening, is it? So great to have you back on the show. We will also have Shane joining us once he has a few technical issues sorted out. So he'll be joining us later. So if someone bumps in, that's who you know it is. So let's kick off with the questions. How did the Wallabies turn it around in just 1 week?
Well, in our live reaction to that Bledisloe one, I said that second half of the game was probably going to do them better than, they came into that game with a degree of confidence. They knew they could put points on the All Blacks, and they got the dream start. I think that in the first minute really just gave them the impetus to go on with it and to the All Blacks.
That definitely helped me. They did have one of the things I said in the live post reaction to the game was that it started to feel like a game of moments rather than necessarily a game of territory or possession that we've seen quite sort of been dominant over the past couple of past season or so, so they definitely had those moments. Obviously, with not the Curly Beale, the Falau intercept, and then also with the Hooper try in that first 10 minutes, and they were scoring at a point a minute there. Now, I do think that they got that good start. But it was on defence really that we saw an improvement, wasn't it? We didn't see Damien McKenzie really cutting that outside shoulder anymore.
There's no doubt about it. The Kurandrani really shored things up coming into the midfield. You made the point last week that it's all at sea. Curtis Rona too looked completely out of his depth at test level. And Drani and Ep8 really, the big improvement for their defence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they made a comment that Curtis Rona was getting targeted by a lot of those kicks, and obviously they say shored that up by having another fullback. It was interesting to hear Nathan Gray at half-time talking about one of the things they had to work on. I think I'm not sure I got quite the word right, but I think the word something along with connectivity from the defence coach, and I think that's what we saw. From Australia, yes, they missed some tackles, but there was always someone else close by. We didn't see the gaps in defence that we saw in the first game. If we think about the try late on, it was out wide. They weren't really making those. And also there was that wonderful handling for the winning try, but the 22 phase try was because Australia's got knackered and ran out of defenders. And I think their connectivity on defence was a lot better in that in the line, so you weren't getting those outside shoulders to run through.
It's a great word too, because I think that they actually exposed the All Blacks connectivity in defence as well. In particular, those last 2 tries where I think 2 occasions got caught being lazy on the inside. Tackle didn't have a guy coming to support. And Gear and Beale took advantage of that. So defensive units, they work as a system rather than individuals. And if you are too individual, that's when the holes get exposed.
Absolutely, and but there was definitely some areas that still they need to work on. I mean, there's the scrum was going backwards at a rate of knots, and definitely needed to get shorn up by obviously Stephen Moore was pulled for a start, and that there was definitely struggling in that area. I think also, actually, that's more of an All Blacks point, but I think when Hooper got his try, they made that came out because of a head knock to Sam Cane. And I think head knocks also was a big thing in this game. We had quite a few players going off for head injury assessments during this game, didn't we?
Yeah, and probably could have had more, I think. Well, there's certainly a couple of reluctant ones who disappeared, but way of the game now, and I think guys have got to be ready to come off the bench at any time, even if it is just for a 15-minute stint to then come back on again. And I think you saw Savia came on early, played the remainder of the game, but I thought that Leonard Brown, considering that he had separate stints because of those head knocks, and he did a great job. It must be hard coming into a game, leaving again, coming back on.
Yeah, I hadn't really kind of thought about that. I thought he was a bit anonymous to me, but I guess you say if you're coming in and out of the game, your main job is just to not make a mistake and not pull a hamstring from being cold. It's probably kind of the main issues there, rather than other things around or trying to do anything too flashy or too special. We started talking about the All Blacks a bit more, so let's move on to question 2. And in that, one of the things that's been mentioned a couple of times is the error rate of the All Blacks. And why are the All Blacks making so many handling errors this season compared to, say, last year, do you think?
Honestly, I really have no idea. And I think the All Blacks got to where they are with this group of players. They never tried to reinvent the wheel. They tried to do things at a greater pace, cutting out those errors. Little core skills, handling, passing. Everything was done with such a high accuracy and at a high tempo. And for whatever reason, this season, it's just the accuracy just hasn't been there. Whether it's combinations, you take a few guys out of the mix, maybe that has something to do with it. But honestly, I can't put my finger on it.
So if we look at the stats, the players that were causing the turnovers were, in particular, Sonny Bill Williams and Damien McKenzie. Now, Damien McKenzie, obviously, one of those turnovers was when he threw the ball in his first touch and got intercepted for a try. Sonny Bill Williams, though, seemed to spend a lot of time getting hit man and ball, I think. And I'm not sure. And so it seems to be that centre area. Now, one of the things that we talked about straight after the game was the fact that last year we had a lot more change in the centres. I mean, we had Crotty, Tumanavalu in there, or Antoinette Brown, Moala. People were talking about having Nartai in there. That's Rico Wani, I think, played at 13 when he was in the Italy game in November. So you had 5 or 6 players rotating through those positions. This year, we've only really had 3, with Crotty, Sonny Bill Williams, and Antoinette Brown. I mean, Lavappi came in for a bit as well, but it's been much more settled. And so it's surprising, actually, that we're getting more mistakes, and yet we've got a more settled team in that area.
Yeah, I can't put my finger on it. I want to play at the line quite a bit with Sonny Bill Williams. He's a guy that can break the line off those short passes, but just that accuracy hasn't been there. The start of this test, I thought, mirrored the start of the third Lions test. Blacks probably had the more ball, the more territory, probably the dominance, but errors just kept them from putting points on the board. It's frustrating.
No, absolutely. I don't know if it's going to say how they're trying to play, whether the style has slightly changed a bit. Are they with Barrett, with someone like Damon McKenzie? Are they trying to play a bit more? Are they trying to play a bit looser and freer? And yes, and also Sonny Williams, they will get those magic breaks, those magic moments, but along with it comes a number of errors that you're going to pick up as well, because you just can't play at that pace without it. Sorry, I'm just going across to pull up the stats of this game, because as you were saying, that you're saying that the All Blacks will probably have had the better stats, and I'll just run through a few of them here. And on territory and possession, they were at 61 and 62% over the game. They had 17 clean breaks to 9 from Australia, beat 32 defenders to 14. Obviously, were fine at the maul, and the scrums and their lineouts were all good. They only had 6 penalties to 13 from Australia. All of those things suggest a bigger score margin than we saw. But the one thing in there the one thing that sort of clawed it back was 18 turnovers conceded to just 9 by Australia, and that's where the problems really lie.
And yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't hold on to your ball.
And this is a game where we haven't got. This is a game where we haven't got Pocock snaffling the ball. It's a game where it's all about sort of dropping things as well. So let's see what comments we've got. I think Dag needs to come back into the side, and Crotty is more a 12 than a 13. And I think that might be part of. I think that's going to be part of New Zealand's problem at the moment, is they seem to have lots of 12s, but not many 13s. Crotty's a 12, Sonny Williams is a 12, and Amapi's a 12. Someone was saying that they think Anton Leonard-Brown's more of a 12 than a 13, but he does play in both. And there isn't a natural 13 in that team. We're talking about lots of natural 12s, which is a different style of play.
In the future, whether Ioane is the answer at 13. Obviously, he's still only young. He has played a lot of centre coming through the grades. The All Blacks have started with him on the wing. Down the track, looking at the next World Cup, maybe he's the guy that comes in at centre. But because you're absolutely right, those guys do seem like we're trying to play 2 12s together a lot of the time.
Yeah, and Rico, for those who haven't seen him so much, at Mitre 10 Cup level last year when we were watching him, he was always playing at 13. When he started at the Blues at the beginning of this season, he started at 13, and then he got moved out to the wing. And when you think that the Blues had on their books Sonny Williams and Moala, it's quite obvious if you've got 2 All Blacks already centres, you can see why Rico got moved out from 13. And also the previous year, Piers Francis played a lot of 12 as well. So the Blues were basically overstacked in those centre positions, which we saw there. We'll probably talk about look forward a bit more next week, but do you see any changes happening for the Argentina test?
I wouldn't be surprised if Havili got a run at fullback against Argentina. I think McKenzie's been given a couple of cracks, whether they bring Dag in as a bit more experience on the wing because Ben Smith will be gone. Get fullback. Sort of change I might happen. I don't think we'll see too much tinkering. Perenara may get a start, but I think the guts of that team will be the same for Argentina.
Yeah, same here. There's people talk about Neymar Loscado. Apparently, he's playing well for the Turbos currently, and perhaps he might come back in. Obviously, he's had his injury issues this season. Personally, I think David Havili is further down the pecking order. I mean, he's come in because of Geordie Barrett's injury, so to me, he'd be the last one in out of those outside backs. So probably should be the last one to start when you've got DMAC, Dag, Neymar Loscado, who can all play 15. So personally, I'll be surprised if we do see David Havali in there. The other person, obviously, is Sam Kane. Well, maybe, yes, exactly. When we'll be back in 2 weeks' time, and you can one of us gets to tell the other person they don't know what they're talking about. We should probably have coffee bets or something. The other player, obviously, is Sam Kane with the head knock. Personally, I'd like to see him rested, but with Matt Todd getting injured, there's some question marks as to who would be the 7 to come into the squad if he did go down.
Not a lot of 7 depth behind Todd. Reading through some comments on Facebook today, everyone's sort of throwing up names that play 6 and 8, the likes of Brad Shields, Jordan Taufua, Elliot Dixon. I can't see any of them coming in as cover for a 7. So where does that leave you? Maybe someone like Blake Gibson, who's come through the age group systems. It's hard to say. There's no one sort of jumping out as the next in line as a specialist open side. So who knows?
Well, when we were talking at the weekend, and we were saying that Ardie Surveyor possibly would be a specialist impact player rather than bench player, and that Matt Todd might even leapfrog him into the starting 15 because their styles of play. But clearly that can't happen now that he's gone and got injured. Sorry, I'm going to have to take a quick break for my kids shouting out. So hang on, back in a sec. Sorry, everybody, for that. I think we're back again here. Danny Taylor's put in the comments that I think Ardie will forever be pigeonholed as an impact player. I'm not so sure about that when we come to in a few years' time. I think for up to this Rugby World Cup, I think he'll be seen that way. But I think he has the opportunity to grow from that over time, as we've seen Bowden Barrett do, for example. Let's move swiftly on to question 3, which is, after a great Women's Rugby World Cup, where does women's rugby go from here?
For me, they've got to play more games. It's unbelievable to hear the number of caps that some of the Black Ferns had played. Considering captain Fa'amausili, I think, was at her 5th World Cup and only brought up her 50th cap during the World Cup. I mean, that's just incredible for me. They've got to play more games. And to be fair, the Northern Hemisphere teams, they've got the 6 Nations, so they get a lot more of that consistent test football. But the Black Ferns, they just don't play enough games. That's...
Hi Shane, thank you for joining us. And you got over your technical difficulties. How are you doing, sir?
Not too bad at all, Paul. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good. So where do you see the women's game going next after such a good Rugby World Cup?
Well, it's interesting, I mean, I really would like to see it a little bit more promoted in a sense, particularly in Australia, and not just from the 7 side of things, but the 15-a-side game. And I think that we need to look at the role models. I look up particularly to Melody Robertson, who's in New Zealand, as a commentator on I think it's on Sky Sport there. And I think the more positive role models you have, like Melody, that's passionate about the sport, the more that you might be able to get more players involved and those sorts of things. So I think it's a very, very interesting discussion.
Yeah, Sky, to be fair to them, have done well bringing Melody through as a presenter. We've also they also have Portia Woodman on for post game chats as well. She's busy at the moment with the Rugby World Cup, but during the Super Rugby season, she was seen, her face was on TV quite a bit as well. So to be fair to them, in New Zealand, they have been given some exposure and some sort of platform. But Ryan's comments about games is very true. Half the teams at the Women's Rugby World Cup do not know when their next Test match will be, and that's just nuts. One of the things I remember listening to on the Red, White and Black Eye podcast, which is an American rugby podcast, was how over the moon they were to be getting the America's Rugby Championship, because then they would know they got to know that once a year they would be having certain games, and they knew that they were coming up. And I think in some ways that's very we have the same problem for the ladies. We don't know when the ladies next going to play, apart from the Six Nation teams. All the others, effectively, we don't have games lined up. I remember listening, not for this Rugby World Cup, I think for the last one, the Australians came over and had a double header against New Zealand, and that was their first games since the previous Rugby World Cup. So they went 3 years with no games, and that's just crazy. If you're going to try and grow the 15s game, now if you're going to say actually forget 15s stays amateur, and sevens is where the future is, then that's a different matter entirely. But I think that if you're going to try and do the 15s games, you need to get the regular competitions in place and to start off with. Christian Ketley says it's quite odd that the New Zealand team ain't pros. Well, again, they have no competition to be in. If you remember at the last Olympics, South Africa didn't send their sevens team to the Olympics because they didn't have a chance to medal. The women's team, they qualified, but they weren't sent, and so Kenya got to send their team as a second qualifiers from Africa. So South Africa clearly is not invested in women's rugby. They weren't at this Rugby World Cup either. Australia, as we say, go 3 years without games. Who does that leave New Zealand really to play?
And I think if you look at the scores in that World Cup, there's a massive gulf between England, New Zealand, and the rest, basically. So USA look like they're competitive. They're coming through. They've got some young talent that they've brought through from other sports. Canada as well, not too bad. But the rest of the teams, New Zealand won every game by a sizable margin, even including the final, really, in the end.
Yeah, there seem to be three teams that were a step above the rest in England, New Zealand, England, and France. And then, Ireland, who have been good previously, they didn't. They struggled in this Rugby World Cup, I think, through injuries. So, yeah, that gaps they are pretty big. And we got the kind of scorelines that we saw in the 2003 Rugby World Cup, where I think New Zealand beat Japan by like 100 points. We saw a similar sort of thing happen in this Women's Rugby World Cup. But you've only just got to see how that's changed from 2003 to 2015 with investment in the Tier 2 nations, how those gaps have narrowed, that it can narrow in a relatively quick, short period of time.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
I'm being corrected by Warren on the interview. Says South African women pulled their national team to invest in grassroots rugby so that their national team is stronger in the future. That, I hope, is very true. But imagine what the South African women's sevens being at the Olympics, how much exposure that could give about and growth for the game internally. And personally, I think that was the wrong option then. But I see that perhaps there's a disagreement. Perhaps South Africa are investing more in their women's rugby, but apparently, I say that's not really what's there. The thing that actually I think was special about this Rugby World Cup was some of the television numbers. Was I think the final something about 2.5 million peak viewership for the Rugby World Cup final, Women's Rugby World Cup final. Those are crazy numbers, and if a broadcaster doesn't jump on that and see, hey, here is somewhere where we could invest money, we could pay the players a tenth of what we're paying the men's players, and we could get as much exposure. That should be music to the ears of some sponsors and broadcasters, I would have thought, in a time where margins for broadcasters are being squeezed.
Well, they had a good product. I mean, I watched probably as much of the World Cup as just about anyone because of Tribe. And some of the games were outstanding to watch, even between the lesser nations. You know, they like to keep the ball in hand. They like to run it from wherever they can. And in rugby. So the fact that the viewer numbers are up is good to see, because they were watching something that was enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, and I think France is perhaps the place where it's going to grow. They had very good viewer numbers, and they have actually also put other games on TV, domestic games as well. So it does look to be growing in France. Personally, I would like to see New Zealand look at trying to sort out some sort of tournament, be it or some sort of annual tournament, be it with Australia, Japan, and the Pacific Islands, maybe, if travel is such an issue, and maybe and look at also making that top tier professional, so that the women players have got something to aspire to, that they can see that if they're good enough, they can go full time, because we do have a provincial championship here in New Zealand. I've been to the semi-finals of the last 2 years when they've been in Auckland. Now there's only 50 to 100 people there to watch the games. They don't get big viewerships, but there's definitely there's a structure there for them to develop players through, at least. And on that note, we had obviously the Women's Rugby World Cup this weekend. We've had an awful lot of other rugby on. Is rugby at or beyond saturation point with a number of top flight matches?
Yes and no. And I think I always believe too much rugby is never enough. But I live and die by that. But I suppose when you look at things like the Currie Cup and the Pro 14 about to start, and the player numbers, particularly for Free State and the Kings, and how those teams are going to be utilised within those two systems, certainly will be very, very interesting. But are we at saturation point? That's a very good question. I suppose that now that we're in a global rugby season, I guess it's a part of the market now, and the same with other sports like cricket.
It is a spot. The last weekend we had 16 what I would call top flight games in across the day. These are the current competitions, either are on at the moment, just finished, or just starting. So we've got the Women's Rugby World Cup, which has just finished. We've got the Rugby Championship, which is ongoing, the Top 14, which is ongoing, Currie Cup and Mitre 10 have all started, and then next weekend the Aviva Premiership, Pro 12, and NRC all start. So across that, we've got something like 8 major, what I would call top flight competitions happening at the same time, which to me is an awful lot of rugby.
I think it's kind of the society we live in too, where it's so easy to engage with these competitions, to follow games. Shameless plug here, but you can follow them all on Tribe, so it's great. You know, you've got the results, you've got the scores all in the palm of your hand. Back sort of 10, 15 years, it was a lot harder to follow all these games. And something like the Mitre 10 Cup, or as it was probably back then, the NPC, that became your weekend. You know, that's what you were looking forward to. Now there's so much more out there that you can engage with, that you can follow. So yeah, maybe there is a point that it's becoming too much and there's too much rugby on, but I certainly still watch plenty every weekend.
Well, for people like yourself and me, you obviously, I say, you're with the Tribe Sports app, you're producing live commentary for lots of games in rugby. So as many more games, the better for you, and not just rugby and other sports as well. For me, I now have about 6 competitions I'm doing predictions for going on. So my content is all basically written for me for the next 5 months. It's kind of easy. And I guess Warren makes a good point in the YouTube thing. Depends what you look at and what teams you support would depend on your definition of saturation. And that's true. As a Saracen supporter, you might not worry about the Curry Cup, NRC, and Mitre 10 Cup. Yeah, you probably would look at the Rugby Championship. But apart from that, really, is it? Do you really care about the other ones? I think part of it for me and some of us is, I guess, that I am covering so much myself that sometimes I do get burnt out a little bit. But I think a lot of the European supporters, especially, are keeping an eye on these Southern Hemisphere competitions nowadays because so many of their players are coming from there. And so they're kind of like, who is the next guy we're going to sign? Who can I watch to see who is coming through? And so I think there might be an element of that also, is that with players traveling, there's more awareness of these other competitions as well. And on that note, as we have an Australian in the room, Shane, the NRC, are you looking? How well is that being publicised in Australia, and are you looking forward to that over the next few weeks?
Well, it's been advertised pretty well on pay TV, Paul. But I'm definitely looking forward to and I'll miss the opening game, ironically enough, because my club side is in the grand final this week. But it's fantastic to see that we're starting to grow the game, hopefully from the grassroots section, because Australian rugby, let's face it, needs to go from that level up. I'm looking forward to it. I think you'll find that the quality of rugby that the Wallabies have been playing lately will be going towards what the NRC and sides are going to play, and it's going to be a very, very interesting contest over the next 10 weeks. I wish they'd started the season earlier, to be honest with you, because I think that South Africa have taken the right direction, starting their Curry Cup earlier, and New Zealand with their NPC or Mitre 10 Cup over there. Australia could have taken a bit more of a lead there, but it's been well publicised, particularly through television and so forth.
One of the things we've seen with the Curry Cup by doing that is that certain teams have definitely suffered when the senior team is still in the finals. So, for example, the Sharks and their first couple of games suffered, and the Lions are still suffering now, to be fair, now that they've lost a lot more players to the Springboks than they have done in previous years. So starting during Super Rugby, I think, is a little bit too early for this, really. So yeah, I think waiting until that's finished is probably a good move. On the Mitre 10 Cup one, obviously we see teams backing up twice in a week, at least once a season. Do you think that devalues the competition, having tired teams like that, or do you think that just adds extra spice to the competition?
It's got to be a challenge for them. I mean, if you've seen the Auckland team that they've named today, massive changes from the weekend. They play twice this week. Really inexperienced side that they're putting out there. But then, that's the kind of thing that makes New Zealand rugby so strong. Those young guys get thrown into the fire, and for whatever reason, they tend to come out looking okay.
And I'll be at Eden Park tomorrow night for the Auckland versus I've got Waikato. So if you're going to be there, do let me know, please. I guess the other thing is, one of the things we've seen about Super Rugby is that it's got stale and people have got bored of it, and viewership's dropped. The NRC, I think, is going to get a lot of attention this year because they've gone and added a Fijian side to it. How much do you think they need to keep adding I don't want to say gimmicks because that's not what it is, but spicing it up each year rather than keeping it the same sort of, or rather than keeping the same sort of competition going.
Could you just repeat that again, Paul?
I think so. I think the NRC is going to get lots of coverage this year because Fiji have entered a team, and I don't want to call them a gimmick because I think it's a good thing to do. But how often do they have to keep spicing up these competitions to keep interest? Because we've seen with Super Rugby, it got stale, and people sort of turned off.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Paul. I mean, personally, I'm looking forward to seeing how the Fijian side goes, because I think that is the added spice, as you mentioned. But I would say that when you look at the NRC and why that was put in, I think that was more that the ARU felt of gratitude to Fiji for perhaps the players that had contributed to the Wallabies side and so forth. But certainly I know that they will certainly play with a lot of pride and passion, and it does add that spice, as you'd mentioned, to the competition. So we'll see how it goes, but play it by ear. This is really, for the other 9 Australian sides, certainly a place where they've got to develop the grassroots structure that Australian rugby desperately needs.
Yeah, I think there's been a resurgence of grassroots rugby in Australia, from what I hear. And lots of the club sides have been getting good turnouts. I was at Eden Park at the weekend, actually, and it was kind of scary how many people turned out for a school's final game and then left and didn't stay around for the Auckland Northland game. So there, in some ways, the community is both a lot in Australia, but a little bit less so in New Zealand. Is connecting more with its clubs and more with its schools than it is with some of the sort of professional sides nowadays.
Yeah,
I guess I was going to say, if you look at sporting leagues around the world, and you see things like the Premier League and the NFL where they're not having a drop off in attendances, and there's a little bit of tribalism about them, and I think the schools rugby brings that out. We're proud of the school they went to. You only really go to one school, and you take that with you, so that even after you've left school, that's still your school. People want to get out there and support it. The current students want to get in behind their mates, and you get that kind of tribal atmosphere that's just, for whatever reason, has just gone out of the Mighty 10 Cup, and it's gone out of Super Rugby.
I think with Super Rugby, part of that is, and one of the things we saw during the season was Auckland Rugby saying that they had a player playing in every single Super Rugby team. So me as an Aucklander, well, I'm not using my accent, but as someone living in Auckland, going to see Auckland and then going, well, hang on, across my back line, I've got Vekitoa, who plays down for the Highlanders. I've got Asso, who plays for the Hurricanes. I've got, and I can't remember who the other players were, but obviously there's Blues players in there as well. So you could see players looking at it going, is it a team or is it some sort of all-stars select team? It's kind of, it doesn't have that continuity that I think initially we saw in Super Rugby, where the provinces were properly tied to a Super Rugby franchise. And that's something that you're seeing in the NRC at the moment with teams like the Perth Spirit and the Force, Melbourne Rising with the Melbourne Rebels, Canberra Vikings and the Brumbies, Queensland Country and Brisbane City match up obviously to the Reds, and then you've got 3 sides in Sydney, because that's the big, so the Rays, Country and the Rams all roll up into the Waratahs. So yeah, it's that kind of tying them together closely and saying you don't just disperse across the country, I think is something you need to keep that tribalism. It's hard to be tribal about someone and then be tribal about them again in another competition when they're playing with the opposition. And talking about all this tribalism and this sort of stuff, who have been the winners and losers over the first 2 weeks of the Mitre 10 Cup?
Well, I think a clear winner for me has been the emergence of Asafo Amua from the from the Wellington.
The Lions.
The Lions, Wellington Lions. Hooker is not a position that New Zealand rugby, I think, are particularly deep in. They seem to trust Coles and they trust Taylor, but I think the Lions series showed that there's not a lot of trust even in Nathan Harris, who's the clear number 3. Behind that, Coltman and Parsons have been given a little bit of opportunity without ever really taking it. So a guy like Almua, who's come through the age group system, he's burst onto the scene. He's taken these first 2 weeks of Mitre 10 Cup by storm. You got to wonder whether he's maybe a bolter for the end of year tour, even if he's not as a full member of the squad, but in one of those apprentice roles that they've used over the last couple of years. So I think he's a clear winner for me.
Well, we're seeing some comments in YouTube saying that North Harbour are the winners. I
would have said North Harbour, but that's just being a bit biased as a big North Harbour fan. So I don't really want to toot their horn too much just yet. We'll see how they go this week when they go into the Battle of the Bridge.
Yep, it is Battle of the Bridge on Sunday after Auckland have had to back up play on Wednesday. So everything's in North Harbour's favour there. But it was interesting to see the TAB, which is the sort of gambling site place here in New Zealand, jumping on the North Harbour bandwagon, going, "Hey, they won 2. They're on the way. Can they make it to the finals?" And I'd just like to temper everybody there for a second. So far, they've played Otago and Southland, I think it is. So 2 championship teams. They haven't even played a premiership team yet. And that's one of the things that makes the Mitre 10 Cup a bit difficult to understand from outside the country, is trying to compare. So you have 2 divisions, but you get cross-divisional games. So you end up with teams that can sort of win about maybe 2/3 of their games, topping the championship because they've lost all the games to the premiership sides, and that kind of thing. So I think I definitely think the jury's still out on North Harbour until they play a couple of premiership teams.
It was an interesting weekend actually in that regard, because you had, I think, 4 crossover games. You had Manawatu as a championship side beat Tasman. You had Wellington as a championship side beat Taranaki. And you had Otago and Northland, who were 2 championship sides, really push Canterbury and Auckland. So Harbour had another, so there were 5 crossover games. Harbour was the other one, and they were the only team, I think, who picked up 5 points from that game. So that kind of goes well for them. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Until they play those premiership sides, it's going to be the litmus test.
Yeah, Wellington are looking pretty good so far. I think they've got a good chance of getting promoted. Being the second or third largest city and not being in the Premiership it does seem very strange. And I think you've got to back Wellington, who to be looking to come up. They've done very, very well. And finally, the other one that people are mentioning as winners are Canterbury.
I think
I agree with that.
They're going to be there.
Canterbury, they're going to be there. Canterbury a stupid amount of times, and I think there's only once in the past living memory they haven't actually made the final. So yes, they are clearly going very well. Tasman, though, we're talking about the losers. To go from being finalists a couple of seasons ago to now losing their opening 2 games, what's gone wrong there?
Well, I was actually pretty vocal, I guess, amongst my colleagues and my peers before the season that I thought they were a contender for relegation. And you only have to look at some of the talent that they've lost. Guys like Ross Geldenhuis gone to the Kings. He's out with his continuing head knock worries. Lose Marty Banks is a big loss. not going to have Liam Squire. They've now had Havili and Hames called into the All Black squad. That's a massive amount of talent to lose for one team. But I think Jordan Taufua is probably the only sort of notable signing this year. This weekend they were also without Andrew Makalio and James Lowe. So that's how can a team cope when they've lost probably 8 frontline players? They're going to have a real challenge, I think, to avoid.
And it's a real shame for a side that's got such good culture when you've got something like, I think it is a half of the squad have got tattoos of the original Mako's logo, that you can tell that these players are all in there, definitely, because with professional players moving around so much, you don't get, if some players had every single team they played for tattooed on them, there'd be no skin left. So you've got to say, if someone does go and do that, you've got a good culture at the club as well. Someone's saying that we shouldn't be having the 2 conference resolutions. Everyone should play, everyone wants, and so that's the only issue. Finding enough room in the year to do it. Of course, that is the issue. There is only so many weekends in the year, and there just isn't enough weekends to do that. Auckland, on the other side, that hasn't had a good start to the season. You say they only just saw off Northland by a couple of points after losing, admittedly very closely to counties. I think they're going to struggle this year, and I think part of that's going to be down to the fact, as I was talking about, their players just go off to so many different Super Rugby franchises, and when they come back, they just don't have the combinations. And the Mitre 10 Cup has such a short pre-season to try and get anything sorted that it's very difficult to get that in there. And I was trying to find the other team. Jack Darby reckons Northland are one of the early season losers, which I was a bit surprised at.
I disagree entirely. I think for them to pick up.
I mean, same here. I'm shocked. To me, I think Northland's had a great start to the season. You've got to remember, last season they won 1 game to end one of the longest losing streaks ever. So to go from that to having won a game already this season is already a great start. And with Southland next weekend, they've got a good chance of doubling the number of wins they had all of last season in the first 3 weeks. So no, Northland are definitely not in the losers pile in my book anyway.
Can I just say something on Northland, if I could, Paul? I think I had a look at the Northland game. I think it was the first round game where they came from behind to win, and there's a really good attitude with the Northland boys, and I think that they're one of the big winners at the moment. I think they're turning up and they're having a crack. And I certainly don't see them as a loser at all.
No, and I'm a great fan of their big blue wigs that the fans wear in the stands as well. It's good to have a bit. I'm all for dressing up, and I think we should have more teams like the Turbos with their bucket heads and that kind of thing going on. I did suggest.
I was just going to say on Northland, they're another team that's recruited really well. So you look at guys like Murray Douglas and Tim Bond that have come into their forward pack, getting Rene Ranger back, and then Jack Goodhue. So they're a side, I wouldn't be surprised if they're hanging around that 4th spot in the championship and maybe sneak into a semi-final spot.
So someone's here saying that the Mitre Cup is all nice and strong. But the crowds are not strong, are they? And I remember watching the opening game in North Harbour against Otago, and the place was empty. Again, at the weekend, it was pretty sparse. I mean, Eden Park is too big a ground for this kind of tournament, to be honest. But we're not going to be many fans turning out, are we?
No, and I think it's become what it's become. We've got games on a Wednesday night now, so I know you'll be there tomorrow night, Paul, but I never sort of wake up on a Wednesday and go, I might go to the rugby tonight. It's never on my sort of to-do list.
So you don't jump out of bed, do a little dance, go, it's game day, it's game day, it's game day.
If it's Harbour, maybe, but there's so many games on. It's. I still watch just about all of them, but getting along to the game, and yeah, the experience of going to games in New Zealand just isn't worth it for mine. The rugby is fine, but it's all the other stuff around it that just doesn't attract.
Yeah, I guess I like it because I get to go into the members' lounge and have my curry and my beer beforehand in comfort and warmth. Whereas as a non-member turning up to Eden Park with pretty dodgy food, and the sausages are okay, but apart from that, it's not really that good a place to go to, or that stadium experience isn't great at all. Someone on here said that I've always had problems with the advertising campaigns for Super Rugby and Mitre 10. That's Danny Tanner. I actually quite like the Mitre 10 Cup adverts where they have two fans sat on a terrace make a joke about each other's mascots or something, about fins up or whatever, or looking at a Waikato scarf and go, Guten Hagen, you're German, aren't you? I don't know. I'll disagree there. I think they're quite. I quite enjoy the adverts.
Yeah, and they're trying to hark back to that tribalism, aren't they, with the colours and the.
They are, but I think again, with the players moving around so much nowadays, it's a bit hard to maintain that tribalism when you got players jumping between different provinces all the time. And up in the Viva Premiership in the top 14, you can understand it for money. That's not what's going on here down in New Zealand, though. So yeah, I think players moving around so much hurts that tribalism, definitely.
I think on that point, though, it's been good this year as a positive of the Mitre 10 Cup to see how many guys have gone back to their home provinces. So I was talking about Ranger and Goodhue before, going back to Northland. You got like Stephen Donald going back to counties. Kieran Reid, even though he won't play, has gone back to counties. Guys like Sean Stevenson and Chris Eves have come back to Harbour. So I think that's good to see. You're absolutely right. They're not going to other teams for money, so they may as well play for the province that brought them through.
Shane, sorry, I think I've managed to mute you somehow, so please, if you can figure out how to unmute yourself, that'd be great. Yeah, exactly. So it's a shame that that's kind of happened. Well, that brings us to the end of the show this week. Thank you guys, everybody, for joining us. There's been a good chat going on in the YouTube channel. So if you're listening to the podcast and would like to see what's going on behind the scenes, 8 p.m. every Tuesday on YouTube, you can watch what's going on, and also you can join in on Twitter at DrivingMaul is the person to follow. Ryan, where can people get hold of you and chat to you outside of the #Rugby Chat?
So they can follow me on Twitter at New York Nixon. They can also download Tribe Sports app through the App Store or the Play Store. Just type in Tribe Sports app and you'll find it. Live coverage of all the games on there.
Cool. I'm sorry, but I've got a muted Shane, so he can't tell you how to get hold of him. But he comments and I retweet his stuff all the time, so check out on there. I've been Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget, subscribe to the podcast. Do give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Other stars are apparently available, but don't bother with those. And get back to see us on YouTube next Tuesday at 8 p.m. for the next show.